What's up, my dudes? We got what I consider the greatest MX Simulator RF Supercross track that there ever has been right here. And I knew it from the very first time I ever saw this track when I pro raced on this track. They got like a 7th or something in the main event on this track, but there was something about just the way the entire scaling of this track was designed, the way the jumps are spaced apart, the width of the track, the way the corners were made. Literally every aspect of this track is, in my mind, what I look at as like a perfect MX Simulator Pro Racing RF Supercross track, right? So this is 2017 Indianapolis. Okay, if you haven't rode on this track before, go ride on it, dog. You'll see what I'm saying. But specifically, why I'm even really making this video right now is to try to compare this to what they're doing currently with the 2020 RF Supercross tracks and how different this track is from that track. And, you know, like what I look at as... Okay, so let me explain it to you like this. So you see the scaling on this track right here, this 2017 Indianapolis. This is where I feel like all of the tracks would be at, to the point scaling-wise and size-wise and all that kind of stuff. This is where I feel like we would be at on all the tracks in 2020, at least. You know what I mean? Because the game over time, the scaling just gets a little bit bigger. The jumps get a little bit bigger. You know, everything over the years in this game have just gotten a little bit more skill gapped. Whoops have gotten a little bit more skill gap. Jumps have gotten a little bit bigger. The overall scaling of everything, like if you go from a 2010 to 2011 to 2012, 13, 14, 15, and then to 17, you know, that scaling range was just getting more and more impressive, more and more like, oh man, this is the next year of RF Supercross tracks. Like, hell yeah. And then this was basically the pinnacle of that next level scaling, next level skill gap. This was the pinnacle of it right here for RF Supercross on MX Simulator, all the way back in 2017 Indianapolis. And ever since this round, I don't feel like we've ever really matched this sort of skill gap and scaling and filling in the game since then. I don't think we've done it yet. So this is honestly... And to me, like, had they never went down the road route and all that kind of stuff and just sort of kept going down the roads they were at in 17, but just improved on the pre-made and, you know, the skill gap and the scaling and everything and all that, could you imagine where we would be at by now if they had just kept improving on that base pre-made version of a track, not worrying about a road, not rolling the corners off, not changing the traction, not changing everything else, not making it super flat everywhere, no inside ruts like they've done for the past 2 years. Could you imagine if they didn't do any of that, like catering the track around a road and building it for a road, and just building it like they did the 17, like specifically the Indianapolis 2017 RF track, but continued to make it better and better and better over 2018 and 2019. Could you imagine how good the tracks would be like in 2020 had they never went down the road route? Could you fucking imagine, dog? Like, that would have been... They would have been on such a level at this point with the track making an RF. It would have just been amazing. It would have been downright amazing where they would have been at this point. And you just imagine, like, every round in 2020 RF Supercross sort of having more of this kind of scaling. You know, this is one of those tracks to me that feels like it was actually made for the premier 450 class in RF Pro Racing. Whereas, like, for instance, the first 2 rounds in 2020 RF Supercross literally feel like they're made for an 85. And then round 4 of the 2020 RF Supercross feels like it's just made for a 250. There's a lot of these tracks in the way they make scaling on a lot of their tracks currently, it feels like it's made more for a 250 than an actual 450. And of course, all the 250 riders, or at least a lot of them, are going to be like, oh, I love this track, oh my God, talking about some of those newer, RF 2020 tracks because they're made for 250s. So obviously, if you're pro racing on a 250 and it feels like everything's made for you and you can easily triple in out of the corners on a 250 and, easily hit the main triples on a 250 and this, and that, then obviously you're going to like the track more. But that's not how they should design the tracks, man. They should design them around the premier class, which is the 450 class. The actual track scaling and all that stuff should be designed and based around the premier class, and then the dudes on the 250s, on the smaller bikes, just have to adapt to it. That's the way it should be. Whereas, in my mind, over the past couple years of RF, it's been the other way around. It's been more like the tracks are more made for a 250, and then the 450 dudes just have to adapt to it and slow down and hit smaller lines and not hit any big quad lines anywhere and, all this other stuff. There's just a level of skill gap that this sort of track right here captures to me, that it's like, if you can go fast on this track, you are that 1 percentile. You are that, next level separation. This track has true separation to it. You know what I mean? You can really show your skills off. You don't feel like you go into a corner and just jackknife and have to go slow and tiptoe on your Jordans in all these corners like you do on those newer RF tracks. You can just bang out of these corners, dude. There's traction. The whoops are fucking gnarly. I mean, they're not too crazy, but, compared to those newer RF tracks, these whoops right here are no joke, man. Like, they're actually close enough together and not so rolled off that you have to have timing in the whoops. You have to make sure you hit your front wheel on every single whoop. You got to actually carry speed, carry momentum, or you're not going to be able to make it through the whoop section. Then there's the whole skill gap of being able to carry momentum and carry speed through the corners, whereas these newer RF tracks, the way they have the traction or the way they have the smoothed off, rolled off corners, you can't hardly even carry speed anymore. You just have to tiptoe on your Jordans so you don't jackknife or spin out. Whereas this track, you can just go a little bit faster, a little bit faster, a little bit faster every lap. I mean, hell, I've probably rode 1,000 laps on this track, and I still feel like I could get better at it, and I still feel like I could get faster at it. Whereas I get on some of those newer RF tracks, and I run 5 laps on it, and I'm like, okay, well, this is basically about the maximum you could go on it without a road on the track, And so the replayability and the fun and the skill and the separation and all that kind of stuff is just literally, it feels like it's double on this track right here than any of those newer RF Supercross tracks. I mean, literally, dudes, it feels double to me. So I just think RF really needs to go back to the drawing board and see what they had going on back in these days. Traction just had, you can still spin out in these corners. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you just go into these corners just stupid, not thinking at all, you can still sort of spin out of them or not have the correct amount of momentum going through them. But it still has decent enough traction to where you can get into a corner and really drive through the corner and get on the power and drive around the corner and not just feel like that weird rolled off jackknife traction crap they got going on in 2020 and some of the previous 18 and 19 years. This track, just absolutely perfect width of the track, right? So it's right between that like realistic and a little bit overscaled. It's right between that. This is what I consider perfect Supercross scaling for a simulator video game. You know what I'm saying? For a motocross simulator. If you look at some of these rhythm lanes, you might think, oh, well, that's probably a little bit wider than what it actually would be in real life, as far as considering one-to-one scaling. But like I've always said, with motocross games, one-to-one scaling is not always the best thing, because in a game it's a lot different how everything reacts and looks and the physics of it and everything. So you really want that scaling to be a little bit bigger than one-to-one scaling. And I feel like this right here is that perfect balance between one-to-one super realistic scaling and then big jump, fun, skill gapped wide enough for a video game, for a simulator style scaling. This is that absolutely perfect in the middle. This is what MX Simulator is supposed to be to me. MX Simulator Supercross. This is what it is right here, dog. Like, you know, multiple line options here. You can go up the inside. Main triples are perfectly distanced apart. You don't feel like you have to let way off. You don't feel like you can barely hit it on a 250 wide open. You know, you got just perfect, the peak of the triples have enough peak to them, but they're not like ridiculous. They don't feel like you're hitting some wall or some weird kicker. Just absolutely perfect peak to the triples, perfect size landing. You don't feel like you have this super little baby narrow main triple landing like on some of those newer 2020 tracks. They're not scared to come in here and make big enough berms in the corner and actually cut the berm into the corner versus just having those super rolled off, smoothed off. You can't even hardly get into the corner 2020 RF tracks. They weren't scared to come in here and make a pre-made inside rut in one corner, not only one corner, but two corners on the track. There's a little inside pre-made rut, right? Whereas nowadays there is literally none, nowhere. So you've got all that going. It's just like, dudes, it's just hard to even explain. You got this little section right here where, you know, 99.9% of people are going to hit the outside, jump, bounce off of that right there, do a little tire tap, and then like land right there and do the main triple. But what you can do right here, if you really just want to go for it, there's that little extra line you can go for right here if you just nail this corner perfectly, because the corners are big enough, the scaling's big enough, the corners are dug in enough to where you can actually get into them. The traction has enough traction to it to where you can actually get into it and carry momentum and carry power to where if you hit this super hard and you bounce off of this first jump and you really seat bounce it, you can actually triple this right here and never even hit this little jump right here. If you just hit that absolutely perfectly. So that's always that little nugget of extra skill gap you're trying to potentially work your way up to every time you run a lap on this track. This corner right here, absolutely perfect size of a berm. Just enough to where you can get into it. It's cut just enough into the corner to where you can kind of slide your ass end around. You can get into the corner. You can drive out of the corner. You can hit it 10,000 different ways, but it's not such a big berm that it's just like you're just mind-numbingly going into it full throttle and not thinking. You know, there's still a little bit of that balance. And then the triple out of this corner, jumping all the way on top of this table, perfect scaling to where you're not going to be able to quad over that, right? You know, but it's like still feels like a big jump, a big triple in, right? And that's what I feel like this track captures so well. Even on some of these sections where you're not hitting a quad, like this right here where you're doing the triple in and then triple out, it still feels like a big rhythm because of the scaling of it, because of the distance between the jumps, because of the size of the jumps, because of the width of the track. Even on the smaller rhythms, it still feels like you're hitting a decent rhythm versus on a lot of the newer 2020 tracks. When you're hitting like a triple rhythm on those tracks, you literally feel like you're just hitting the most small little arena cross scaling rhythm or some little, you know, track that's made for an 85 or some shit. I don't even know how to explain it, what they're doing on those newer tracks, but you got this whole cool section when you come off the finish line where you can, another one of those real skill gappy multiple line options. Most people would just like double this and go to the outside or double and then single that before the whoops. But if you hit it absolutely perfectly, you can actually huck this all the way over and triple this right here. See, these are all those little interesting, unique, little skill gappy lines that you just don't see anymore in those newer RF tracks. You literally just don't see them at all anymore. This corner right here, banked up enough, dug in enough, tall enough to where you can get into the corner, not feel like you've got to just totally slow down and tiptoe in your Jordans through the corner. You can actually carry speed, which then adds more skill gap to it. You don't have no bullshit eroded one singular motocross berm in the corner. I mean, shit, guys. Man, yes, I've beaten this dead horse till she's just, you know, plumb turned into a ghost, but I just had to come in here and explain this just again, like, man, look at how good they used to make tracks. Look at how good they used to make tracks. In the skill gap of, like, specifically this corner right here, where you've got to, you know, you're going in with so much whoop speed into this corner. So it's like that balance of like, you got to get on your brakes, you got to be able to turn wide enough in the corner, but you still got to be able to slow all your momentum down to a point, but then carry enough speed to then be able to carry it through here and triple into this to a point to where you can then carry the speed to huck this full quad through this corner right here. Whereas on a newer RF track, first of all, the whoops would be so small they wouldn't even be a skill gap. The corner would be so rolled off and smoothed off and fucking janky traction, you wouldn't even be able to really carry that kind of speed. And then third of all, the scaling of this rhythm would be so fucked up that you wouldn't even be able to do like a triple and then a cool quad out right here. And then even if you could, they would have this next corner so cramped down, so small, arena cross, smoothed off, rolled off scaling that it wouldn't even be worth hitting this quad anyways. I mean, literally. Like, they've taken all the fun out of the fucking pro tracks. They've taken all the fun out of the game. They've taken all the skill gap, all the fun, everything out of it. It's like they're just making these basic, boring, no personality, smooth, tracks made for an 85. I mean, that's literally what it feels like they are doing now. Like, where has these tracks gone, man? I don't know. They used to be amazing. So all these bullshit excuses that RF is trying to make, like, we got to roll the corners down so you can't quad in. We got to build it like this so it doesn't do that. We're trying to improve. We're trying to make it better. Well, look at what they did all the way back in 2017. Look at what they've already been capable of making all the way back in 2017. Great corners. You can't quad in any of the rhythms. Awesome different skill gappy lines in certain areas. Pre-made inside ruts. Big enough berms. Traction that you can carry speed around the corners. I mean, they've already done all this. RF, what is there to even say? What are you even trying to, improve on and do? You're literally not even caught back up to where you were in 2017. I mean, shit, bro. Oh, it's just pitiful. But either way, I just had to come in here and explain, man. This is the best RF track there is out there, in my opinion. Just amazing skill gap. People like Tyson Fresquez, Hunter Root, they can separate themselves so much more. True, hardcore MX simulator dudes, they can separate themselves on a track like this versus those little bullshit 250 made, no big line. You got to slow down and tiptoe on your Jordans in the corners tracks that they're making now. And then plus the dumbass road they got going on it. It's just all the skill gap is gone. All of the real competitive, big scale jumping, all that's gone. I mean, every bit of it is gone. Like, the game doesn't feel epic anymore. The game doesn't feel like, woo, big stadium, cool scaling track. Like, just doesn't feel like that at all. So, either way, appreciate you guys watching all the videos. Later, dudes.